guys, welcome back to another episode of Faith Unraveled, where we discuss the chapter of life after deconstruction. For us, that means after Mormonism, but for many of you who are deconstructing from other faiths or trying to figure out how to maintain some semblance of faith after deconstruction, we are here to talk about it. And today we're taking some questions from our Instagram audience. And you guys, I said, what are you struggling with right now in your deconstruction? And I got so many responses just even within the first 5 minutes. Oh man, we really feel what you guys are going through. And I want to start off by saying so much of what the struggle is after deconstruction is around family, whether it's like in your immediate family or your parents or siblings or even cousins and aunts and uncles.
I would say take a step back. It's just around connecting with people, not just family, your community also that you were in. Because
Yes.
you feel like you just learned something that makes it very different than being in that community anymore. And you don't know what to share, how to share it,
If you
if
should
you should
share.
share it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then if you have a partner who's not on the same page, then you're like, what do I do about that? Is this going to affect my relationship?
Oh, it's so difficult.
Very complicated.
I remember with my first kid reading parenting books and thinking, I'm doing all the things that they're talking about, but the toddler years or the young child years can be just so tough. And you can read all these books and apply everything that they're saying, and it's still going to be difficult. There's sometimes just not really a remedy for it. Our hope is that this podcast will at least be a little salve for the pain, that it will hopefully relieve some of what you've got going on in your life, even if those issues continue and there's not really an easy way out in the immediate future. You can at least know that there are thousands of people that are feeling the same way you are. They're experiencing the same dynamics, and we see you.
Yeah, I also think there's not one way to do this too, because everybody's situation is very different. They have different dynamics, whether it's their husband's in or their wife's in, or their parents are fully a temple president or a mission president or fully in an Orthodox believer. And so that makes the journey a lot different. And depending how many friends you have that are Orthodox also, as you start moving through the faith deconstruction, you start, I, part of me is I isolated myself too. And then they isolate you too. So each person, each family, each individual will be different as part of this process.
Different dynamics for everyone. And once in a while, we'll get some kind of nasty message or commentary from someone in our immediate community. And it wakes me up to the reality that this is what a lot of you are living with on a day-to-day basis with family members. And I can't imagine what it must be like to live that way. I just think about their kids. I think about the fact that so many of you in our community are dealing with these kind of nasty dynamics with parents who you feel like there's no longer a place for you at the table.
And
That's
it's
got to be really tough.
and it's okay to take this journey slow. You don't have to like just cut off all the relationships, or you don't have to just walk away. Take this at your own pace, what you're comfortable with. We talked about it being in like a poisonous pond. If you can deal with that poison for a certain period of time and you want to deal with the complications that will come with that, I think it's totally fine to take it slow when you're ready to walk out of that pond.
It's so interesting, like to think about what that process is like of waking up, but then looking around you, you see things from a very different perspective. It's almost like having the bird's eye view because you're no longer in the program. You're watching everyone else in the program, so to speak. And for those of you who are so many, by the way, that are functioning PMO, physically in, mentally out, you're going to church each week. You might even have a calling. You're trying to figure out how to fulfill that calling to the best of your integrity without it's so tricky. It's such a complicated dynamic. It is valid. There's so many places to land after deconstruction. For some of you, it's going to be getting out and saying, I need to get my family out of this. That was eventually where we landed, but it took us time to get there.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that in a second. Another way to function is to go PMO, where you're completely deconstructed. You no longer believe, but you got to keep attending church for whatever reason. Maybe it's because of a spouse. Maybe it's because someone wrote in the comments, I just cry when I think about my mom having to go to church by herself. And that's the reality. Like some of you are attending just to support a family member. That's valid too. And then some of you are going to deconstruct and try to figure out a way to maintain some semblance of faith and continue to be part of the community as a partly deconstructed, and maybe you found a way to exist in that space in a new way. Those are
Yeah.
all valid options. I don't think there's a one
Yeah.
right way to deconstruct from
And
religion.
we talked about Alicia's mom who deconstructed in the 90s and stayed PMO until Alicia left the church um, back in 2020. So that was almost 30 years that she felt like she had to stay like that. And part of that was she had her mom who was still alive. She also had all of her siblings that were fully active. And then we were fully active at the time. And so she felt like she needed to be physically and then mentally out during that period of time. And so it's all dependent. And that was 30 years, right? So each person's different, what they want to do within that period of time and what boundaries they want to set. And I think that's the key is figuring out what's your boundaries. Can you be in a Sunday school lesson and hear conversations about Joseph Smith and be able to sit there and be comfortable with that? Or be in a church that supports segregating LGBT out and not supporting LGBT? You have to figure out what you can deal with while you're part in the church.
But just know that whatever you decide to do is valid to us. There's so many different ways to handle a faith crisis. Let's talk about yours a little bit, because we kind of deconstructed at different paces. And that's the other thing that, I don't know, hopefully it'll give someone else a little bit of hope. But Jamie first found some conflicting information about the church back in 2009, 2008, 2009.
Time frame.
And it wasn't until 2019 that I found the CES letter and I recognized everything that he had been talking about. Because I was so closed to looking at that information when he presented it to me, he stopped right there, which kind of allowed you to maintain some semblance of faith for the following 11 years, right? But
yeah, because I didn't go as far down the rabbit hole and all this stuff. And so I had gone down enough to where I didn't have like a testimony of the temple anymore. And so you saw me pretty much stop my temple attendance at that point in time.
Yeah.
Wanting to go because it became so problematic for me in my brain. And when I did go, I only went because like you had asked, hey, I like for this certain period of time, can you go for me?
And it was so difficult at that phase for me because I was going more than before to make up for you not being there. But I felt guilty every time I went to the temple because I felt like I was leaving you. And so it was this kind of division between my faith and my marriage.
Yeah.
And so whether you're the one who's deconstructed or you're the one who's still active and maybe your spouse is fully deconstructed and they don't believe anymore, that's a really tricky dynamic. That's when the church really starts to feel like a wedge in your marriage.
Yeah. So I'm going to go into our dynamic between 2008 and 2019 a little bit.
Please do.
So there was times I would come in to talk to you about the church. And so this is where I think it becomes very difficult for whoever is going through this type of scenario is to figure out like, how much can you talk to your spouse about this? How much can you talk to your parents about this? Everybody's going to be a little bit different. For me, I started realizing really up front that our marriage was going to have a significant wedge if I kept on pushing forward with this. So when I talked to you about like the book of Abraham not being what it said it was, a translation of Abraham's writings. It was truly.
And if you're not familiar with this, do you want to give a brief recap?
Yeah. So
on the book of Abraham, which is a canonized Mormon scripture.
Yeah. So
what's the problem with it?
Joseph Smith bought these scrolls from someone that had brought them from Egypt. He claimed that they were Abraham's writings, and he translated them. And when we investigate these scrolls, and people will say, well, these scrolls were burned, you don't get all the information, but you can pretty much see that they were funeral scrolls.
And his immediate followers had no reason to question him.
Yeah.
But what happens a couple hundred years later when we actually do know what it says?
Yeah, that it didn't say anything around that. And so there's a lot of...
What did it say?
It was funeral scrolls. It was talking about like all the gods, the Egyptian gods, and being able to transition into the next life.
Would that be equivalent to like a modern day newspaper obituary?
To some certain extent, yes, I would say so.
So it was this very common funerary scroll, which was from ancient Egypt.
It doesn't have one word of Abraham in it, and and if you want to see a good podcast, there's Robert Rittner and John Dehlin, and they have like a 3-part series where they go through those funeral scrolls. But even before that, I mean, you can find this all over the internet around that, and that's where I found it at the time. John had not had his podcast, but there was internet sites that compared, and I figured out real quick that that it wasn't. And the church came in afterwards, once this started being produced and brought forward, they said, yes, you're right. There isn't, like, we can't translate this.
Right. I think if you look up gospel topics essays and then the words Book of Abraham, I
Yeah.
think an apologetic piece will come.
Yeah.
The church actually did publish an apologetic piece, right? And they
Yeah.
said that it was a revelation, and really it just should boil down to your faith.
Faith.
Do you have a faith in Jesus Christ? Oh, well, if you do, then you know that this is true, regardless of how it came about. And for some people that works, and for Jamie it didn't.
Yeah. And the second one was Masons in the temple. So I started doing research because my dad was a Mason, and he shared with me prior to going to the temple that he knew the signs and covenants because of Masonry. And like, I did some research because he told me back in the day that Masons were Solomon's temple builders. And so you automatically think, well, it goes way back when.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, it fits into the narrative of the
beautiful.
church. But then you find that that's not the case also. And so my testimony took a major hit because in my mind, I'm like, wow, like, two core faith topics that I knew real well are not what they seem to be. How many other things are starting to be the same out there? And as I started doing some research and I brought this back to you, well, I don't think at first I didn't bring this back to you. I think you started seeing a change in me, and that's when you took me to the bishop, right? We talked about this. And I think from there on out, I went from, I'll say, a 6 or 7 down to a 4 if I was to rate it, like, my testimony.
How
from
Mormon are you on a scale of 1 to 10?
And
you went from like a 8.5 to like a 4.5 maybe.
Yeah. But I had to sit in church and hear this stuff on a regular basis. And I was able to still continue to swim in that pond for a certain period of time because I still didn't get to the point. If I probably hit Joseph Smith and polygamy, like the bad stuff, I knew to a certain extent, but like the Fanny Alger event and some other events, the Nancy Rignan event, it would have been really tough for me to go to church on a regular basis.
My recollection is that it was about 2012 that you brought to my attention the Fanny Alger conversation. So it must have been a little while later. So you had been grappling with all this stuff, not saying a word about it, but I just felt a wedge between us. I felt like all of a sudden, I just felt like, why doesn't he like church? Like, I'm serving as young women's president at that time. And I just felt like every time I left, he was like, do you have to go to this activity? Why do you have to go? Don't you have counselors that can help you with this? My counselors were amazing.
Yeah.
And I do feel like they held a lot of my responsibilities at that time because I had so little support in that calling. You were working like crazy. He was driving up to LA. We live in San Diego. He was driving up to LA for work. He was exhausted, burning the candle at both ends. And I'm trying to do my calling because I love the gospel. I'm doing it more scrupulously than I ever have. My OCD is just all to the church. I mean, obsessive compulsive with scripture reading, blogging about the standard works in a year scripture schedule, getting the sisters in my ward to read the scriptures with me during the year. And I mean, I was going all out, and he is disillusioned.
Yeah. So I stayed. Well, I did bring up polygamy, but I didn't know the details of it.
It was like years later, though.
Yeah, but I didn't know the details. I knew just a high level, like, I did know that he married a younger girl, but I was told that they never had sex. I did know at the time that Emma wasn't aware with all of them, all the marriages, but I thought she was aware of at least some of them, and that she consented to some of them.
I think the reason that I got so upset over that conversation, because if you remember, you came to me and said, so what do you think about the belief that I'm going to have more wives in the next life?
Yeah. You told me no. I don't believe in that doctrine. That's what you said.
I literally said, I don't believe in that doctrine.
Yeah.
And you said, well, it's in Doctrine and Covenants.
Yeah.
Like, there's actually no way around it. And I'm like, I think Joseph Smith got it wrong. And you kept probing.
Yeah.
And you finally got me to the point that I had to rationalize that God took Joseph Smith from the earth because he was leading the saints astray. But then Brigham Young, how do you then rationalize Brigham Young, Wilford Woodruff, and John Taylor, who all practiced polygamy with young girls as well?
But the point here is Alicia wasn't ready at that time to hear this information. She had been, she was so orthodox in her belief system. And I felt like you felt all of your ancestors and the seven generations of Mormonism, that there was no way that this wasn't true. Like, you were 100% diving into the pond and loving it.
Yeah. And how do you justify, if the church isn't true and Joseph Smith wasn't a prophet, how do you justify all the spiritual experiences that you've had in the church? I mean, there's just so much that you have to work through. And I think ultimately it's just creating this understanding that there's so much nuance to belief and there's so much nuance to deconstructing. So there are going to be aspects of the community that are, wonderful and you may love. And there may be aspects of the belief itself that is beautiful. You may find that there are scriptures in the Book of Mormon that still speak to you. I mean, I love the Book of Ether. I love the story of the Jaredites and Mahonri Moriankamer receiving this gift of resolving an issue. Like Heavenly Father is saying to him, like, you create a solution to this problem of not having light in the barge. And I know it sounds silly now, but to me, as a faithful member, like when I think about the beauty of that story, it still brings tears to my eyes even now.
It does bring any tears to my
and
eyes.
I know it's made up. I know it's made up. So they can exist together. There can be beautiful stories. I mean, I still have scripture mastery in my head, and there's parts of it that I love, but it's like the line about this is either true or it's all a fraud. I just don't think it's that binary. I think
there's more nuance to that.
It is
what you're saying, especially since you deconstructed.
Yeah.
And the roles reversed. Like in 2019, as you like one day fully deconstructed and said, "Hey, I don't believe anymore," I was still in.
And you were still maintaining that nuance.
Yeah.
You were like, I have figured out how to autopilot this thing. And I just went from, because my brain was I was so scrupulous about my belief and practices that when I deconstructed, it was just like it all went out.
Everything. You're right, because you were all in. When things fell, everything fell for you.
Everything just shattered all at once. And
I was able to get more to a nuanced space because of the 2008, and I could believe and not believe. I could hold both polarities and say, hey, I don't believe in the Book of Abraham. I really don't believe in the temples, but I do believe in Joseph Smith and Book of Mormon. I still had like some type of belief in them when you deconstructed in 2019. And so there was a period of time there, the roles reversed, and you were like, hey, I don't want to go to church this weekend. Why don't we just keep the kids home? And I'm like, no, we need to continue to go. And you're like, well, the family's going, and I want to be with the family, so I'll go. But then you would go to Sacrament, and you'd be out in the car for the rest of the time. And Bishop started seeing a difference in you at that period of time, because he started asking me and saying, hey, how's Alicia doing? Because you were, I think he could see that you were starting to disconnect completely. And she started listening to Mormon stories, which then I started hearing things more that I didn't. And then eventually I was able to drop, figure out what was going on. So number one, I think for those that are PMO and dealing with a PMO relationship, it just might take time. There might be times where it will never, like they will always be double down. They will always stick with the church. And then you have to figure out what's your boundaries at that point in time and communicating that. But
it is possible that the day will come. And
it happened to me, right? I would have never guessed that Alicia would have walked away from the church. And
then it was like the roles reversed, because all of a sudden I was the one who completely lost my belief and he was the nuanced member. I mean, still TBM. I mean, you were still like, I don't agree with all of it. But
I was like, yes, I don't have to pay as much tithing. Yes, I don't have to go to the temple as much.
That's right. You got a 10% raise the moment, because I was the reason that we were paying as much tithing as we were and signing up for everything.
I honestly feel like I gave a lot of my money to something that had no value.
Yeah. Well, it's complex, but the reason that we share this is just to say the mixed faith marriage situation, it's so difficult. It can take time. Ultimately, we're talking about 11 years of mixed faith marriage that we had, that Jamie was just kind of waiting in the wings.
And it impacted our relationship too. So know that during that period of time, I think our relationship struggled significantly because we were in very different places. And I believe she felt like I was dragging us dragging us down to hell.
Sorry about that.
No, but there was more to that. There was more to that. But there became a lot of complacency in the relationship at that time. So I don't know how to solve that issue, because the way the church teaches, it's either us or them, and there's no in between. And so that becomes very difficult with relationships. And you'll have the same problem if you have kids that stay in the church. Luckily, all of our kids have left, but we have friends whose
kids are still active.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the dynamic that I had with my mom. I was always trying to get her go to the temple with me. And I was just always kind of
Yeah.
following up with, and she had siblings that would kind of do the same thing. I think everyone sort of wondered what in the hell was going on with
Whoa.
Gloria. And so she would have like a phone call from a sibling. How was church today? Asking about like, how was your lesson? What are,
Yeah. And
it's done out of love.
mhm.
When you're the
Best
person who've
intentions.
had the deconstruction, it feels like a pain in the ass. You're just like, why are people doing this? But in reality, it's out of love
Yeah.
because they believe that your salvation is on the line.
And so they're doing whatever it takes to get you back so you can have salvation or exaltation is what they call it. So
Yeah.
you can't get mad at the people who are part of the system and doing their best within the system.
It's really difficult. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a really difficult dynamic. So we're going to go ahead and address a few questions that came in, but this is probably out of at least 100 questions, and I feel sad that we couldn't get to all of them. So what I did this week, and I think I'll do it again, is I did a question on Instagram where they could submit a question, and then I did an anonymous, so you could submit it anonymously. So there's two ways to submit them. We have so many topics for the future from these questions. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to go ahead and do 3 of them today. Yeah, go ahead and read the question.
We kind of covered the first one about faith.
Yeah. Do you want to read it
I'm
anyway?
new to this, but have been struggling with my faith.
Yeah. So I would say to someone newly struggling with their faith, just as a recap, there are a number of places that you may land. You may land with a different kind of faith. So looking at the experience of Mormonism as, can I continue to exist in this space in a new way? You might completely deconstruct, but have to maintain your attendance. That's called PMO, physically in, mentally out. Just a little term that the community has come up with. I mean, it's so accurate, right? Physically and mentally out. And then you may end up completely deconstructing and saying, I'm out of here. And the real benefit of that third one, if you're able to do it, is that you can really move on and you don't have to feel guilty about what your new constructs are on life. And you don't have to try to look at the world through the lens of Mormonism. So that is the beauty of stepping away. And for me, it has been very rewarding to be able to step away. And the real beauty of deconstruction is incorporating new aspects of life and sort of going through the wilderness with this openness to new experiences. And that's hard to do when you're still standing outside the pond, right outside the pond.
So I'd like to recommend a book. If you guys want to read a good book around the wilderness, is Brene Brown's Braving the Wilderness. Is really good on stepping outside. And so that was very helpful for me as I read that last year as part of my deconstruction. And so I'd recommend that to anybody who's just at the very beginning of their faith deconstruction, feeling like they need to step outside and needing the courage to step outside. And the book talks about that courage and what it takes to step outside into the wilderness.
Yeah. Brene also talks about the complexities of kind of like holding 2 things at once, which can be really tough. But I think it's a really relevant book, like especially right now with everything going on in the world. We're kind of just, it seems like everything is polarizing. So I agree. It's a great book.
Yeah. So,
but yeah, that would be, and time. Just remember that time is on your side with this. Things are gonna get, it's hard.
Yeah.
Things change over time.
You'll, if you stay in PMO, you'll still have those friendships, but you might feel your integrity over times being rubbed raw or contending with what the church is teaching. If you have a partner who's still in and you're a mixed faith and you step out, that's going to be painful and difficult. So just be aware, whatever you take, it's going to be difficult.
I do want to mention another question that was submitted that kind of goes along these lines. It's someone at BYU Idaho who's deconstructed, and they said, I'm still having to go to church. Everybody around me is active. I'm not really sure how to do this. That would be another situation that I would just say, sometimes you got to do.
Out.
Yeah.
Just finish your schooling because you don't want to start over, leaving BYU, going to any other school. And I don't know why BYU does this, but they set their curriculum different than a lot of the schools where if you transfer, you lose a significant number of credits.
At least that's how it was when we had a kid there.
I would stay PMO and just get it done and then start deconstructing.
And I mean, my best advice would be to try to get connections that are outside of the religion. I mean, finding ex-mos that are also going to church and doing the PMO thing at BYU Idaho. If there's a way to find them and connect with them, I would recommend Chelsea Homer's group on Facebook. It's called Faith Journey Meetups. If you are a woman, you can be in that group. Also, the Mormon Stories podcast group is a great place to ask questions, and maybe start a Marco Polo group with people who are in the same situation that you are in. And I know this probably poses a significant risk if you're at BYU Idaho, because probably if you get caught doing those kinds of things, you might get kicked out.
Yeah, the one negative I've talked to a few friends who are now completely out that graduated from BYU, and having that on their record or having that as on their resume triggers them to this day.
Oh,
So
yeah.
just be aware of that too, because I've heard that multiple times from people.
Yeah, we have a friend who put would rather not say on her LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Yeah, from her where she graduated.
Yeah. So you want to go to the second question?
Okay, so this question says, figuring out who I am. If I'm not a Mormon wife, mom, woman, how am I supposed to act? Oh, this is so
This
good.
is more in your alley, which you probably can describe that.
Okay. The thing that I want to say is that the fact that our religion told us how to be a wife, how to be a mother, how to be a woman is so telling. The fact that even we were trying to configure our lives based on this religious lens, this religious perspective, it says so much about the demands of this religion. So I want to start off by saying that you have to get outside of the pond, really to dive into how can I live outside of the church. You have to venture outside of the church. And I know that probably sounds really overly reductive, but getting out and exploring new spaces, getting new connections, that has been huge. Making friends with people who've never been LDS, getting involved with hobbies where you can hike with people or play pickleball with people, or just exploring what other people do. We were super lucky to we live in Southern California, so there are a lot of people around us that have never been LDS. And we had kind of some mentor friends and neighbors who were like,
Never Mormons.
this is weird. Like, what the way you guys do this is really different. Like, not in a mean way, but like they were willing to give us feedback about things. Being able to talk to them and like just really get the truth, asking them questions like, I don't know, what were some of the topics that came up with
Well,
Jerry and Christy?
We talked about alcohol and like what's the norms of alcohol and what we be aware about.
Yeah,
alcohol.
because the perspectives that we as members have of the outside world is sometimes not even accurate. Like a lot of people outside of the church don't drink because it's not healthy. You know, we imagine like, oh, outside of the church, I'll be drinking all the time. And the reality of it is we seldomly drink because it's really not good for you and you feel like shit and it makes you age and it causes cancer.
Well, it's interesting too about being a Mormon wife. There's a lot that comes to being a Mormon wife. Like you said, normally a lot of Mormon wives don't get their 4-year education, or if they did, they never went into the work field, right? And so there's a lot of like
learning curve.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I'm getting into a space where I'm very uncomfortable, and I might say something that's not correct, and so. But
about being a woman.
Being a woman in an environment that kind of oppressed.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
I don't.
What I want to say too is that sometimes finding your new way involves the pendulum swinging a little too far. We've seen a lot of people that felt like the best way to deconstruct was to open their marriage, which works for very, very few people. I haven't met anyone yet that's really worked well for. I'm sure you're out there and we probably just don't know you. But for some people, like having that pendulum swing way too far in the wrong direction is unfortunately a natural part of the learning curve. So
part of this too, I have to say, is your voice now becomes more powerful in this dynamic, right? Because in the church, you've always had to hearken unto your husband as your husband hearkens unto the God.
Yeah.
That is now gone in this situation.
And it can destroy marriages too, because if he is accustomed
that's
to
where
you being subservient, I mean, there is no way we could continue our marriage without deconstructing the patriarchy. And I have to say, we couldn't have begun to deconstruct the patriarchy until we deconstructed our religion.
And I have to say is also the man has to understand that. Like they have to understand there was an even power dynamic in the relationship.
Yeah.
And they have to change their behaviors. And this is very hard. Like this is something that we have been ingrained in from the very beginnings. I can go all the way back to nursery, primary, when this is
talking about the priesthood.
Yeah, the priesthood and all we see is, as we're sitting in the congregation, is three men up on the stand at all times. And
Yes,
then
and only one of us has the power to act for God.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's not me.
yeah. And so I think that dynamic has to change as part of the relationship in every deconstruction. If you continue to carry that dynamic, it will be very problematic in the relationship.
And
So,
a lot of marriages unravel after deconstruction for these reasons. The church teaches a lot of narcissistic behaviors, and I'm just going to say for men and women, but particularly the features that are consistent with grandiosity and charisma and charm and self-importance, especially with men in the church. So after deconstruction, what you will become aware of in your marriage is whether or not you're married to a priesthood holder who is capable of taking that apart. And that boils down to how flexible they are in viewing themselves in relationship to the world around them. Are they capable of saying, I have been a problem? Are they capable of saying, these behaviors that I have are problematic? And am I willing to actually critique myself and to take critique from my partner?
I would say I wasn't aware of this for
Right.
a good portion of my time. Even in the deconstruction, I wasn't aware of it. And I had to like walk this back, step this through. I had to get to understand it before I could change it myself. And that all takes time to do that. And this is where like I was very defensive of Zach and Jen
Oh,
on Sister Wives, right? Because
on Sister Wives.
or
We keep calling it the secret lives of Sister Wives.
of Mormon wives, the secret lives of Mormon wives.
There you go.
But I kind of went into a defense mode of Zach, not because like what he was doing was like hypocritical and very patriarchal. It was very problematic, right? But I also know that he's part of a system that teaches him to be that way.
Yeah.
It's not like, and that's the core way that the church operates. And so
Yeah.
he's just operating in what he's known since he was a little kid. And so,
you see where it comes from, but is he capable of self-reflection? That's really the question.
But if he does self-reflect, then he's going to be different than the way the church, like to change that within the church
is difficult. Yeah.
It's very difficult.
I feel like it worked well for us. And we were willing to go, I should say, Jamie was willing to go to great lengths. Like, do you want to completely throw out all of the quote gender roles that we have in this marriage? And he's like, because I'll do it. I'll make the bed. I'll do the dishes. I'll do laundry. And it's not like where this comes from him is not, I'm helping you with the dishes. It's,
we all have a part.
We're
in
all
the
contributing
family.
to the family. And this like magical thing happened when he started doing this, because even I'm like, well, no, you don't have to do that. And he just started doing it. And so now what will happen is that we're both like,
showing up.
Yeah, we're both showing up. And like, there's days that he works really hard and I was at home and I'm like, get out of here. You don't need to do the dishes right now. Like, obviously I didn't work today. You did. I'm happy to. But we're both like just looking at our family life as this multi-dimensional machine to keep the ball rolling. Making money is part of it. Keeping the house orderly is part of it. Giving our kids self-esteem and love and support, and supporting them in their hobbies is part of it. I mean, there's so many different aspects of it. And what's beautiful about chopping up the roles and just kind of approaching them outside of those gender role norms is that you get to see everybody contributing. The boys are now pitching in more and they're seeing their dad, and Jamie's handling things like messes left around the house in a different way than I was. And so the kids are getting to see their dad in this capacity and their mom in this capacity. And it's just a really healthy environment for everybody to see that. Whereas a lot of times in the church, it's just like, even if the husband works and the mom works, she's still the one that's doing all the cooking. She's still the one that's doing all the cleaning, even though they are a double income, family.
So to wrap this up, the last question, how am I supposed to act? How would you say she's supposed to act?
Well, I think that breaking out of the prescription, as we always call it, the Mormon prescription, you get to decide how you act.
Yes.
And it's really tricky. I mean, I still love making the dinners. I still love doing the parent duties.
I suck at cooking, so.
Yeah, he's not a great cook.
I love baking, but I don't like
guess
cooking.
Gavin the other day, and he was like, "Dad's really good on the barbecue."
And I'm not that good on the barbecue.
Yeah.
I'm just starting to learn it. So.
But it's just, here's the thing, you get to decide, but it's so hard. The question that you're asking is so valid and it's so complex. And getting out there and trying some new things is probably the biggest key. Exposure, exposure, exposure.
Yeah. So let's go to the next question. I'm scared. This is all I've known my whole life. How will I anchor my life?
Yeah, this is another really tough one because we're taught from the time that we're young that there is a system that we should be anchored to. Losing that paradigm of having something to anchor to makes you feel very destabilized.
Yeah.
But the reality is that people outside of high demand religions,
You don't have to anchor to anything.
they're not really anchored to anything.
Yeah.
And this is where the codependence comes in, the conversation about codependence. We've had this attachment to this system, and now we're losing that. And it feels like we need to replace that with another system or replace that with another, anchor. And
Yeah.
it's just not true. We actually can live our lives without being anchored to a system.
Yeah. I think you have to start getting comfortable in being in the unknown. Like life itself doesn't have a prescribed path. You don't know whether there is a almighty God out there, or is it just the universe, or are we in a simulation, or are we just a petri dish for an alien? There won't be an answer. As much as you look out there, there is not an answer out there. And as much as people will say organized religion is the answer, I can break that pretty quick if you want to do some research on that. So you have to start getting comfortable, not having an anchor and being comfortable in the unknown. And what I had to do myself is I had to start like pulling those anchors up and saying, okay, why do I feel like this is an anchor? It shouldn't be an anchor. I need to pull it up. And I've done certain things to cut those anchors so that I don't I then started getting comfortable just floating wherever, the universe takes me. I use universe. My spirituality is around like the universe, but that's just me and where I've landed. And I've been able to be comfortable getting there. And with that too
you've learned to be comfortable getting you. It's taken a long time to get there.
I felt very destabilized.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why I had to get into books and start reading books and start doing things like the pendulum swinging was what Alicia was saying. You have to be cautious of that pendulum swinging, but I swung it to a certain extent in certain areas so that I could purposely break those anchors where they no longer had a hold of me. And then feeling comfort after I broke those anchors and starting to swim in a boat without those anchors and saying, oh, I'm okay here. But you do still have to develop some sort of value system, right?
Yeah. Our value system is basically to do everything that we can to love and find joy in life and to do no harm to others.
Yeah.
Right after I deconstructed, it was immediately after. I was talking to my daughter, who's an adult. She's 25 now. So this is when she was around 19. And I said to her, it's really hard for me because when I think about my friend had bore her testimony to me. She had converted to the church when she was in college. And so I'm sharing this story with my daughter about my friend. She joined the church. She has 4 beautiful children. She has this incredible life with these 4 kids. And her sister, who didn't join the church, is like in her 50s now, and she's single, and she just like travels the world and smokes pot, and she's just kind of this like wayward soul, And my daughter, in all her wisdom, says, "So,
is there anything wrong with that?"
Why, in my mind, is having this life with 4 kids why is that beautiful? But traveling the world and smoking pot as a single, unmarried, childless Catwoman." Why is that not good? Why is that not good? And so it took me a while to get there, you guys. It's just like you get so programmed with this stuff that it's really hard to see anything outside of it. It can be really tricky.
What were some of the tools that you used to deprogram yourself? Like I talked about, I purposely did things to break those anchors. And
Well,
I'll give one quick example. It's like purity culture was part of me, and we have a nude beach. And so I've head down to that nude beach just to break that anchor.
Yeah, it's been part of
myself.
the exposure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really do think that exposure is the biggest thing because think about it this way. The church, a part of their formula is to get you to not go outside. Like the church really wants to shelter
tries
its
to control
members.
you. It tries to control you in everything that you do, whether you're the bite model, your thoughts, your what you wear, what you eat. And so I think what you're saying is
They try to shelter you.
shelters. Yeah.
And that really does work. It really keeps you in that mindset. It keeps you viewing the world through that lens. If you're never looking outside of that, you're never like watching something because it might have like a scene, or it might be something that goes against your beliefs. And if you'll kind of lean into the unknown and lean into exposure to these other,
Experimenting.
the outside world. Yeah. And this is where it gets kind of tricky, because exploring is kind of a key part of breaking out. But you got to figure out a way to do that without blowing up your marriage, without blowing up your family life. So
this is where it's hard, because I think in normal human development, I think some of this would have been happening in your 20s, right? Like we're in our 40s. You'd have been in college. You would have been experimenting different things, and you would have been setting boundaries, but based upon what you were experimenting on. And you're like, oh, this was a little bit painful going in this direction. So I'm going to create a boundary there, and so they don't step over that boundary next time and feel that pain.
We also feel super lucky that we were wild within the cultural prescription. We were considered wild because both of us had sex with someone before we got married that wasn't each other. And like when I look at people who've never even kissed someone other than their husband, and then they deconstruct, there's a lot there that they're just like,
well, yeah, there's a lot of regret that happens at that point in time, saying, hey, did I miss out on all this stuff because I believed in something that controlled me, and that control was all false.
Yeah. So if I'm giving advice, it's going to be, you want to get as much exposure as possible, but you've also got to take into consideration the things that matter most to you, and make sure that exposure isn't going to spoil your relationships that mean the most to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I think you described it real well.
There's not really any one right way.
And I'll say it is a bit scary. A lot of this stuff is brand new, and you're just figuring it out as you go. And so with the unknown, that unknown becomes scary. I can tell you now that I'm not scared. As a matter of fact, I feel a lot more at peace with myself. I feel a lot more of who I am in this environment. But that's not how I felt for the first 3 years.
It has taken time for sure. So I would say get into some hobbies. I feel like music has been so healing for us, and books.
We go dancing a lot.
Yeah.
We just experience life now. Like every weekend, I'm like, hey, let's go do this. Let's do this.
And so he said to me the other day, you know what's really weird? We're sitting at the beach watching the sunset. We go down to the beach to watch the sunset all the time. I know you can watch the sunset from anywhere, but he goes, you know what's really weird? I don't think we used to do stuff.
No, we didn't.
And he's like, I think it's because I was so like prepping myself for Sunday that it was going to be this all day affair. You got bishopric meeting, you got word council, you got your church meetings, and then you got sitting outside of the bishop's office while people come in. And it's just like, he's just like, man, I just for so many years lived this way that I just was bracing myself for Sunday. So all that happened on Saturday was like,
I also was, Alicia would have called me introverted at that point in time, because it had grinded on me so much.
And it wasn't you.
And it wasn't me. No, it wasn't me at all. Like,
so you get to discover who you were. You got to look at what you loved when you were a kid. What did you like to do? Get back into that. It's going to feel a little like a midlife crisis when you start getting into those hobbies. And I love it. There's nothing wrong with it.
I think a lot of people who are Facebook friends of mine and who are watching me, they're like, what is going on with this guy? But
it's all true.
But I'm not the same person I was in the church. I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago, as I even was nuanced in my belief. And matter of fact, I feel like I'm a better person now than I was previously.
I have one more tip.
Yeah.
Find a real life exmo to connect with, either over Marco Polo or have lunch once a month. Someone who's going to, speaking of anchors, someone who's going to help anchor you in reality. Yeah. Because it is so hard. And I know for my mom, I think she really would have benefited to have even just one person that she could connect with and talk to.
I totally agree with that.
Like all the stuff that you're going through. And that's why the women's group on Facebook, Faith Journey Meetups, is such a great one.
I feel like that was huge for me. Like we developed friendships with a number of people in Utah, a number of people here in San Diego. We were flying out to Utah with some of these groups
just to connect with people. We met them through the Thrive Beyond Religion meetups. And once we met those people and started connecting with them, we kind of found a couple of our little tribes. And it's not just like one group, but we got multiple
groups now. We'll go back
Framly.
and forth.
Our text thread is Framly.
Yeah.
here in Southern California, and we've got some amazing friends in Utah that we love and we
I got
rely
some other
on.
friends here, and we do different things with each one of them. And Marco was very helpful for me with one of the groups that we were in, to where we were sharing a lot of, we were all going through deconstruction together and sharing our
Yes.
experiences together. And I felt
Yeah.
like that was really healing for me.
Oh, yeah.
So
Listening to people share their experiences. One of our good friends who is a Relief Society president, and she just has so many crazy stories, and talking about them and hearing them, you just feel so seen. I think that the biggest healing remedy is just being seen.
mhm.
And that's what you're going to get in these groups on Facebook. That's what maybe you'll even feel just listening to a podcast episode. And if you are watching this, having deconstructed, I want to let you know that you are seen. We so feel you. All the comments that were sent in, I wish we could
Yeah.
respond to every single one of them.
I think at one point in time I had 3 different faith Marco Polo
Groups.
groups that I was in, like,
Yeah.
communicating with, because I just needed it. So I think you're going to finding community outside of the Mormon community. I think it's, especially within the ex-Mormon community, can be very healing and helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You guys, thank you so much for joining us. We hope this has been helpful for you. If you're listening on podcast, please consider writing a review. And if you're on YouTube, please say hi in the comments. We love you guys so much and are so, so grateful to be able to connect with you in this capacity. And we'll see you next week. Bye, guys.